In the world of Formula One, the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend had a scene of chaos and discontent in the front of the grid. But the turmoil wasn't confined to the frontrunners. Further back, we saw the once promising Aston Martin team falter in the development race of this season. The team, with Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll at the helm, found themselves in a fierce battle with Haas, VCar, and Alpine for the coveted final point scoring positions. Despite bringing upgrades to Hungary, Aston Martin's performance continued to disappoint. Their struggles were further exacerbated by a decision from the FIA, which Alonso, the two-time world champion, lambasted as a gross error. Adding insult to injury, Lance Stroll chose to disregard team orders after Alonso had complied, snatching the final point-scoring position from the Spaniard. Aston Martin's performance has been on a downward spiral for the last few months. A series of ineffective upgrades have left them stranded in the middle of the pack, a far cry from their strong start to the season. Their current predicament mirrors their performance in 2023, a promising start followed by a steady decline. Once capable of challenging the frontrunners, though not quite podium contenders, Aston Martin now finds themselves struggling to secure even a single point. This struggle has led to palpable tension within the team, which reached boiling point during Sunday's Grand Prix. But more on that later. In an attempt to halt their performance decline, Aston Martin introduced significant upgrades in Hungary. These changes focused on the floor of the car, specifically the flat-shaped section between the Venturi tunnels where the plank is mounted. The aim was to induce a different pressure distribution to the diffuser, accompanied by changes to the geometry of the tunnels, floor edges, and floor fences to fully exploit this. The team's beam wing second element was also raised to make more aggressive use of the airflow exiting the diffuser. All these changes were designed to work in harmony to find more downforce without inducing much drag. This seemed to be working in qualifying as both cars made it into Q3. However, they still appeared to be lacking the lap time to contend with the Ferraris, McLarens, Hamilton, and Verstappen. Alonso seemed to be on his way to setting a lap, which would have been better than P7, his eventual finishing position, when Yuki Tsunoda crashed. The crash, one of the biggest in F1 history when measuring G-force experienced by the driver, completely destroyed Tsunoda's car. But thanks to modern F1 safety standards, he was able to walk away and race to a points finish in the Grand Prix the next day. The decision to red flag the session rather than wave double yellows in the sector, the crash occurred and meant that no driver got the chance to finish their lap, even if they were past the incident when it happened. This infuriated Alonso, who was on a quicker lap and had passed the incident when it happened. The situation was especially hard for Alonso to accept because of what he claims is a verbal agreement among teams in the FIA. If cars run off track early in a lap, then double yellows will be waved rather than a red flag. This means any cars that have not come across the incident will have to abort their laps, but it does not penalize drivers who are long past the incident. Speaking to the media after the session, Alonso said, "In Q3, the FIA sometimes gets it right and sometimes makes gross errors. Today they made one because they red flagged when I was in the last corner, which is surprising when there is an accident in turn 8. But he meant turn 5. They normally wait for the car to complete their laps, or that's the spoken rule." The FIA weren't done infuriating the prickly driver, though. With the red flag waving, the FIA decided to place all cars into parc ferme, even though there were 2.5 minutes of the session left. Alonso was mostly out of his car when the officials told him to get back in and drive to his pit box instead. Apparently, the FIA had initially decided to end the session, but changed their minds after realizing Tsunoda's car was easy to recover and that the barriers only needed minimum repairs after his crash. Going into the pit lane, Lance and Alonso were put into parc ferme. Alonso said, "They closed the pit lane and put us into parc ferme. We got out of the car, then they told us that Q3 was going to restart. We got back in the car, they buckled us in, and because I had no more tires, I didn't go out again." Alonso's frustration at how the session was handled was clear to see. As he was getting weighed, he was spotted throwing his hat and jacket to the ground as he vented his frustration to George Russell and an FIA official. This incident has certainly added another layer of drama to an already tumultuous season for Aston Martin. Alonso's weekend at the Hungarian Grand Prix was far from smooth sailing. The overlooked team orders debacle unfolded in stark contrast to the one that determined the race's outcome. While Lando Norris reluctantly complied with McLaren's directive to let his teammate pass, Lance Stroll at Aston Martin flatly refused to do the same. Amidst the high-stakes drama unfolding at the front of the race, the fight for the 9th and 10th positions was easily overlooked. With just 6 laps remaining, Aston Martin instructed Fernando Alonso to allow Stroll to overtake into the 10th place, the final point-paying position. Stroll had made his last pit stop later than Alonso and was on fresher tires. Aston Martin wanted to give him the opportunity to challenge Yuki Tsunoda, who was 3.5 seconds ahead of them. This isn't an uncommon move in Formula One, and both drivers are well acquainted with it. Alonso's race engineer, Chris Cronin, warned him of the team's plan. "Fernando, we've got one more lap to close up on Tsunoda," he said with 8 laps to go. "But if not, we might give Lance a chance." Alonso wasn't making any headway on the VCar driver, so Aston Martin decided to give Lance a shot at the overtake. "We will swap back," Cronin said after they changed places. "If he doesn't get him, we will swap back." Stroll was given similar messages at the same time. "Fernando will give you DRS. We'll go past him into turn 1, and then we need to get Tsunoda," his race engineer Andrew Vizard told him. "Everything to get Tsunoda now, otherwise we'll swap back at the end of the race," he added. However, from the outset, Stroll expressed his dissatisfaction with the instruction. "I would have passed Fernando, but okay," he replied. Although Stroll managed to shave off over half a second per lap from Tsunoda, his chances of passing the VCar looked slim. Before the race, it was predicted that drivers would need to be a second a lap faster than the car ahead of them to make an overtake. In reality, it was closer to a 2-second lap difference that was needed to make an overtake. Not realizing how significant a lap time advantage was needed to make an overtake led to Red Bull giving Max Verstappen a suboptimal strategy, and all the radio messages that came with that. As the laps dwindled, Lance managed to get close to Tsunoda, but never had the pace to actually make a pass. As he entered the final sector on the final lap, Lance's race engineer reminded him to give the place up. "Lance, if you don't get him now, you need to switch back before the line," he said. "Fernando is 4 seconds behind you. There's no pressure behind." There was no response from Lance, so Vizard tried again. "Lance, suggest you drop back. Let Fernando pass. He's 4 seconds back." Stroll again gave no reply and crossed the line in 10th position, taking the final points position, which Fernando had given him a few laps earlier. Alonso also appeared to assist Stroll early in the race. After both started on soft tires, Alonso ran ahead of his teammate in the first stint and pitted on lap 7, while Stroll stayed out until lap 13, longer than anyone who began the race on softs. Alexander Albon said that Aston Martin used Alonso at that point to delay other drivers who had pitted early and help Stroll. "Fernando was playing a good team game," said Albon after the race. "He bunched up the whole group to allow Lance to come to pit and extend his stint." Neither driver commented on the team orders after the race, but it was a weekend that left Alonso incredibly frustrated. Alonso said after the race that his team had made the wrong decision with their strategy. "A bit surprised when we stopped in lap 7 because we talked this morning. Our car is hard on tires normally, so if you stop in lap 7, there are 63 laps to do with one medium, one hard, so it was a challenge from that point. We didn't have the pace and strategy didn't help," he said. He was heard over the team radio after its first pit stop, saying that he didn't care about what the other cars around him were doing with their race strategy because they were already losing the race with everybody due to the poor decision-making of the team. Do you think Alonso was right to be angry at the FIA after qualifying? And what do you make of Lance Stroll ignoring team orders and taking the 10th place from his teammate? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Formula One and want to stay updated with the latest news, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Keep the pedal to the metal, and we'll see you at the next race.